This is Something's Coming Up, where the purpose is to release, to purge, to reach one, teach one, help one, save one, to stir up what's inside so something's always coming up. I am your host, Kimberly Newton-Nichols. Welcome. Let's continue to push through the pain.
So I thank you, first of all. I just want to say thank you for agreeing to meet with me on this podcast. I talk a lot about mental health, something that's close to me, something that I've dealt with for years. And it's not talked about in our community. It's not talked about from our perspective. And there's a stigma that's on it. Yeah. So, Tariq Trotter, Blackthought, thank you for joining me. This is an absolute honor. We have people who don't speak about it. What do you think about the mental stigma and depression and mental health in our culture?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. As far as the stigma that's associated with mental health issues and sort of discussing, issues within the Black community, I think it's rooted in sort of the same foundation as so many of the other stigmas that are, that sort of prevail in our community. Just over time, I think as a people, we've become less and less likely to show our emotion, because we come up in situations and, over generations, we've, found ourselves in situations where we have to defend ourselves in some way, shape, or form, mm-hmm. or in many ways, right? And, the more open you are, the more that you share about yourself, or the more that someone sort of knows about what's going on inside your mind, or, inside what's going on with you emotionally, the more vulnerable you will come. And we come from, it's our in our background, we're sort of conditioned not to show that vulnerability. So as creatives, as intellectuals, as adults, mm-hmm. As we become more mature, it's almost like a deprogramming process that we have to go through in order to really, become more in touch with ourselves, and to really, first and foremost, understand what's going on with us personally, right. And then to properly represent that, you know what I'm saying, to the public.
I find, for me, as early as the age is 14, mm-hmm. where our parents, they had their own things they were dealing in. So nurturing a child's emotions was never a priority, right? So we kind of had to learn for ourselves, yes. how to navigate what these feelings are. Yeah. And something that I always say, push through the pain. Yeah. We don't address it. We don't talk about it. And for sure, there wasn't counseling back then. Right. There was nothing that we spoke about.
No, so there wasn't counseling.
Right. So now coming from, let's throw in a Caribbean background.
Yeah.
And I go to my mom, not necessarily saying what I'm feeling, but I have these emotions that I can't explain. And it's met with the response of, oh, just come on, get over it. That yeah. And it's very dismissive. And it's not to knock them. They did better than their parents did, right?
Yeah.
But at the same thing is, we're constantly doing what? Pushing it down. Yeah. And now here you are, an adult, trying to be in a relationship, trying to be in the workforce, and you don't know how to navigate emotions. So you push it down, but it comes to a point where it bubbles. And I'm finding more so now than ever, dealing with suicide ideation, dealing with always feeling less than.
Yeah.
And as a Black woman, always feeling we have to be strong. We're the heads, we hold it together, not really knowing where to turn and who to go to, because we can't look weak.
Yeah.
We just can't. And so how do we change that narrative? We have kids. How do we teach them what wasn't taught to us? And I want to, if I can ask you, when is the first time you felt emotions of possibly sadness, depression, and what did you do with that?
Some of my earliest memories of, depression, sadness, darker days. Well, when I was a really young, a pretty young person. When I was about 6 years, well, not about six, when I was 6 years old, I burned down my home. I burned our house down. I was playing with a lighter and with some action figures and stuff, and sort of melting them down, and just getting really into the play with these army men and creating
I know that
explosions.
scene well.
Yeah, so this was long before childproof anything,
Okay.
fireproof stuff. So the lighter got hot, and it was a sort of thing where you take your thumb off the button, the lighter stayed lit, and it burned my hand. So your natural
Drop
response
it.
is to drop it. I dropped it, and the carpet and the bedspread, I was in my mother's bedroom. Essentially, everything was flammable back then, so everything sort of went up in flames like
Right.
really quickly. And at the end of the day, we lost our home, and that was though it wasn't the first place, like it wasn't the first house that I lived in, but it was the first house that I can remember. I guess I lived there from the age of about 3 to 6 when I burned the house down, and from then we became nomads a little bit, and we had to sort of move around, and in that, just dealing with. Well, first of all, my father, I lost my father at a very young age, like before I turned 2. So
Okay.
it was me and my mom, like pretty early on. And when I burned down the house, we had to move around so much, and sleeping on, staying with friends and family, and sleeping on floors and sofas and that whole thing. And yeah, it was I think like around that time, at the age of the second half of my 6th year, into the age 7, that I just I was really sad, and I did have those feelings of less than. It was that's the first time I recall sort of noticing just the difference in certain people's experience. I mean, certain folks have a home, so certain people have 2 parents. You know what I
Right.
mean? Certain people, their parents are home when they get home from school. Certain people, their parents
Oh,
weren't.
what was it called back then? Like latchkey kids,
Yeah, I
right?
was I was a latchkey kid.
Okay.
I
And so,
remember.
were you an only child?
No, I wasn't an only child, but I have an older brother who is my older brother's like 9 years older than me. So
Okay. So there's that big gap,
yeah,
right?
and he and my mother had always sort of been at odds with one another. So he just wasn't around. He was staying with my grandmother most of the time in a different part of the city. And actually, when I burned the house down, the day of the fire, he was in the house. And when the fire fighters came to put out the fire, he got into a huge fight with them and wound up punching some of the firemen, and they got into like an all out sort of a
Wow.
brawl, a tussle. And he was sent away. Like he wound up, when he went to court, he was sentenced to like time in the juvenile justice
Okay.
system. And this was in the state of Pennsylvania, because
And
I'm
this is
familiar.
due to that incident?
Yeah, this was due to that incident,
Okay.
and from that point
So now
on,
you're dealing with the fire, your
yeah,
your brother's outbreak, and now he's
yeah,
being sent away about this. So you those,
yeah,
and you can imagine those emotions are harboring. Like,
yeah, and
okay.
he remained in the system, for most of his life. I mean, he's in his 50s now, but he
Mhm.
easily spent 30 years in prison, if not more.
Mhm.
And it began back then, when that fire took place. So yeah, moving around a lot, and I was a latchkey kid. As a real, young person, I was very much on my own. My mom would leave to go to work before the sun came up.
Mhm.
She would be, wouldn't be home until
With
it was
many
dark.
kids, you
Yeah,
you 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 leave to go to school on your own, and she's already
yeah,
gone, and then you come home. So it's
yeah,
like things now that they say is illegal because we can't leave
yeah,
minors,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
so now you have to figure it out. And those rough days in school,
Absolutely,
whatever you went through in school,
I had to
there's
deal
no one
with
to
it.
release that to.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I listened to um interview you did where you spoke about when you get a second chance, make it count.
Yeah.
One shot.
Yeah.
And it's certain people I take things from, and it's what helps me get through. And it brings me to why I started this podcast, right? So my depression is always situational, and suicide ideation, always planning and plotting because I feel like I'm not enough. And so I never tell people take medication because I for me that doesn't work. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I want to be seen, I want to be able to communicate and be heard.
Yeah.
And sometimes these medications numb you, and you're just a shell of yourself. And I never wanted my children to look at me like mommy's on something, right?
Yeah.
And then I met with people that say things like, but I think they would rather you alive, so why don't you take something? So it's a toss and turn, right? So when the pandemic hit, I was thrown 23 years on my job. Okay, now we're furloughing you. You sit home. I don't know how not to work. I don't know how not to do things.
Yeah.
And then how do I do this? So I instantly go into panic mode. And when I'm idle, those thoughts, it's just habit forming. They just start. And it's the plotting and the planning. And it's literally gone from, and it pains me sometimes, like I've only recently started saying it out loud. And something you said earlier, use your pain, use your shame, and tell it the way you need to tell it so it can't be used against you, right?
Yeah.
So it was suicide ideation, but it to truth be told, it was also homicide. Because you're like, if I leave, you can think of a million people, but no one does it like you. And then people are like, oh, that's selfish. That's a selfish thought. As time went on, I learned you're raising them well enough to withstand, right? So now we're in a pandemic and wow, what am I going to do? What happens? And that's how this was born, because I love hosting. I love speaking and I love healing. And so as much as this has helped other people that I've interviewed and spoke with, it was self-serving for me.
Yeah.
You know, where I'm getting to release and tell, but it's helping other people. So now we're in this and it's taken on like a life of its own. And I take things from what people say that help me. So like with your one statement, one shot.
Yeah.
When you get another chance, make it count. So here I am again in a situation that if I sit idle, I can spiral, I can unravel, and I could be back in that pit. But that statement, when you get another chance, make it count. And so I'm like, here I am. I don't know what this does. I don't know where it takes me, but it's healing me and it's helping other people. I've met people who really gone through some things.
Yeah.
And it's like you look at them, your guy, wallow.
Oh yeah.